Here is something that we think is worth your time. It's an op-ed published in the Oregonian last week calling for police misconduct records to be made public. See, right now in Oregon, if an officer gets in trouble or is accused of something, it's really hard to get information, especially on the punishments that they get. And a lot of people think that's a big reason for the lack of trust between police and the public, including state lawmakers. On Friday, in fact, they passed House Bill 4207. It creates a public statewide online database that tracks if an officer's certification has been suspended or revoked. Initially, the database would have tracked all disciplinary records, but the bill did get amended, so this is as far as it goes for now. It also requires all law enforcement agencies to review the personnel records of an officer before hiring them. Kind of news to me that they weren't already doing that. The governor is expected to sign it soon. And now the woman that wrote that Oregonian op-ed is Ginger McCall. And if that name sounds familiar to you, here's why. She was appointed Oregon's first public records advocate in 2018, but last year she abruptly resigned. McCall says Governor Kate Brown's office was pressuring her to secretly work for the governor's interests instead of the public's interests. So while she no longer is in her position, she still cares about making Oregon more transparent, including when it comes to policing. I spoke with her earlier about what she wants to see happen.
Now, you wrote about it in the op-ed, but in your words now, if you were making the rules, what would they look like when it comes to transparency and investigations into police officers and what the public should have available to them?
Well, ideally, all of this information would be proactively disclosed, which means that no one would ever have to make a request for it. If there's a disciplinary investigation into an officer and that officer is found guilty of wrongdoing, that the records of that investigation are put up online in a database that anyone can access. But barring that ideal case of proactive disclosure, these exemptions should be repealed. Specifically, the exemption about withholding information about disciplinary proceedings against officers who are found guilty. I also think that withholding information about officers who are found to be not guilty is also important and should be disclosed to the maximum extent possible, because that, if an officer is found not guilty, that gives us information about the system itself and whether or not these systems are working properly.
Some people argue that opening up these cases and these files to public interpretation could lead to misinterpretation, because police officers do follow a separate set of guidelines than the rest of the people walking around, given the nature of their work and what they have to do to protect society. There is a concern by some people in law enforcement that opening up these records would endanger those officers and would endanger their families and the people closest to them.
I can't say that I really share those concerns. I think that if there's a situation where the guidelines are allowing officers to do things that are perceived by the public to be abusive and violent and brutal, then those guidelines need to change. And we need to be able to see the operating system that results in, officers continuing to be on the force when they've been found guilty multiple times or when they've had multiple complaints against them. The public needs to be able to evaluate the rules and the guidance that's resulting in these outcomes.